Last night, the U.S. Senate passed the so-called Respect for Marriage Act with 12 Republican senators supporting the law codifying a redefinition of marriage. The bill now returns to the House of Representatives for a final vote there, where it is expected to pass in the Democrat-controlled chamber of Congress. Viewers and listeners of Washington Watch will recall that 47 Republican Congress members voted in support of the initial bill last June. So it will be interesting to see how many of those 47 Republicans change course now that the threats to religious freedom in the bill are understood. Joining me now to discuss this and more is U.S. Representative Warren Davidson. He serves on the House Financial Services Committee and the House Select Committee on the Economy. He represents Ohio's 8th Congressional District. Congressman Davidson, welcome back.
Good evening, Joseph. Always an honor to join you all.
Good to see you. What's your reaction to the news out of the Senate last night that they have passed this bill, repealing DOMA, redefining marriage in federal statute?
Very sad. I mean, mourning, frankly. It's really sad to see people that have sworn an oath to support and defend our Constitution. The first article of the First Amendment defends religious freedom, not just the non-establishment clause, Congress shall make no law establishing a religion, but it also gives us the free exercise of religion. And that, of course, is an individual right. Just like the Second Amendment doesn't protect the right of the military or the police to keep weapons, it protects the right of individual citizens to carry weapons. This law that passed the Senate on marriage basically says the government will protect, government recognized nonprofits in churches, but it totally undermines individual religious freedom.
Now, this bill is now moving from the Senate to the House. You and your colleagues will take this up. Talked in the open about the fact that there were 47 Republican members of the House that voted for it the first time it was considered. What do you expect the second time?
Well, I know some people will change their votes, and unfortunately, some people might actually go the other way and say, oh, they passed an amendment that protects religious freedom, so now they'll vote for it. It's sad to see anybody fall for this window dressing. And part of it, they said, well, Obergefell has passed and Loving passed. And so we're just protecting what has already been recognized by the court. And no, they have an enforcement mechanism in here that really gets at, decisions like the Masterpiece Cake Theater. And people don't understand that decision. They think that the baker wouldn't sell cakes to certain people. No, they wouldn't make wedding cakes and attend weddings and serve wedding cakes at a wedding that they didn't recognize in line with their faith. They were selling cakes or flowers in the flower shop case to anybody that came into their store. It was the specific marriage issue. And so my hope is that we don't just have two Supreme Court justices that will defend religious freedom, that we have the whole bench will say, no, religious freedom, the free exercise clause applies to individuals, not just to nonprofits and churches, because that's where this is headed. It's definitely headed for court.
All right, Congressman Davidson, do you believe that the debate over religious freedom in this bill is a sincere one, or is the appearance of religious freedom protections just there to give those who are really inclined to vote for cover so that they can do really what their instincts tell them they want to do?
Yeah, this is fake. I mean, complete AstroTurf. And Mike Lee and Marco Rubio, but really Lee's amendment was the one that actually had teeth in it. And that's why they, passed. I was glad that Republicans overwhelmingly supported it, but it did not pass. And without the Lee amendment, the bill shouldn't have passed at all. And frankly, we should still be defending, marriage as a sacrament, frankly, a union between one man and one woman. And at least it does protect that for churches, which is more than the bill that passed the House when 47 Republicans voted for it. So it is better in that sense than the version that passed the House. And that's my fear, is that some of my colleagues in the House will go for the window dressing, and I just hope that they don't.
Congressman Davidson, I want to switch topics with you. The Department of Defense sent its annual China military power report to Congress yesterday. It indicates that though Taiwan is squarely in China's crosshairs, that they do not believe an invasion is imminent. What are your thoughts on the developments there?
Well, the Pentagon report that they sent to Congress is about 200 pages. I can't say I've read all of it. I've read the summary and the highlights and some of the things I dug into detail. And, I am concerned about the Taiwan issue, and it's encouraging to say that they don't think it's imminent, but clearly the Chinese military is preparing for that contingency. They're equipping and staffing and building weapon systems that would facilitate that mission. And the other thing that the report addresses is their COVID policy. And it was nice to see Joe Biden, the Biden administration, at least some reference to protests, including in China. But I think part of the reason they've been so reluctant to criticize China's zero COVID policies is, frankly, that's what Joe Biden tried to do to our own country and wasn't able to get away with it. But if he could, there's really aren't a whole lot of policies they're doing that he wouldn't support.
Well, the report also notes that the Chinese Communist Party used the chaotic military withdrawal from Afghanistan to portray the U.S. as both an unreliable international partner and a nation in decline. But as you might expect, the White House sees this differently. Secretary of Defense John Kirby was asked about this over the weekend. Here's what he had to say. Let's play clip one.
And I don't know that that's the Pentagon's assessment that it was a propaganda gift to China. If anything, nations like China and Russia took a look at what we did in Afghanistan, and we've talked about this many, many times over the last year, and had to marvel at the speed, the efficiency, and the effectiveness that a very small number of troops. Brian, you listen to me now and hear me out. A small number of troops were able to move that many Afghans safely out of that country. No other nation in the world can do that.
Congressman Davidson, did the Chinese government marvel at the effectiveness of the U.S. military in Afghanistan?
No, sadly, they see Joe Biden for what he is. He's weak. And, not just China, Russia, everyone else, including our allies, sees Joe Biden as weak. And unfortunately, he is going to continue to be our commander in chief. And it looks like people are committed to keeping the same failed team with Antony Blinken as Secretary of State, Lloyd Austin as Secretary of Defense, Mark Milley as chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I think they should all be fired, along with Mayorkas, because border security is a component of national security. We look weak on the world stage, and we especially look weak to China, and they're projecting strength. That's not what's coming out of Afghanistan. You don't have to have worn our nation's uniforms, served a single day in the military to know that first you take the civilians out, then you take the military out. We were using the Taliban to filter who got to leave. The Biden administration said the Taliban wouldn't wind up in control of Afghanistan. Just like everything else, that's always false. And everyone saw it for what it was.
Continuing on the subject of China, we've seen the Chinese government begin cracking down on the ongoing protests there. However, major Chinese cities like Guangzhou and Chongqing, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, announced an easing of COVID restrictions today. Is this evidence that the protests are working?
I think it is, and they've had strong protest activity in China, and the party, just like they want to stay in power. They've been pretty ruthless, frankly, in their imposition of a zero COVID policy, and I think eventually, and my fear was they're going to be even more brutal in their crackdown. And privately, they may very well be doing that. They've built detention facilities for all sorts of people in China. So, I wouldn't count this first wave as the action. They just want to change the public narrative early and be seen as doing something and being responsive. But fundamentally, if they don't get back to making things better for the average Chinese citizen, the Chinese Communist Party is going to have a tenuous grip on power. And I think a lot of people realize that under Xi Jinping. They see the threat, and that's making Xi Jinping crack down even harder. We'll see whether he develops any real rivals inside the party, but we saw what happened to Hu Jintao, and that was meant to send a message.
Now, with respect to these protests, it's not the first time. These are actually somewhat common in China, in different parts of the country, that these protests spring up. How should the White House be responding to this, if at all?
Well, look, they've been weak in responding to the protests in Iran, too. I mean, we should be looking, these are enemies of our country, at least the governments are. But the Iranian people, we should be supporting the people in Iran. We should be supporting the people in China, just like we were, at least at the time, we were supporting the people in Hong Kong, and we were rightly condemning the action of the Chinese Communist Party and Xi Jinping as the leader of that party. And I think that's the right action right now in China. And look, it's their country, but the average citizen in China wants the same kinds of things that the average citizen in America wants. And I think, look, the evidence is in, and part of this is people seeing whether it really is the World Cup or not. They're saying, hey, these policies really aren't based on science, and they're not keeping me safe. These policies are wrecking my life, they're wrecking my culture, and they're wrecking my country. And people are seeing that all over the world, not just here in America. Just because of the power that the Chinese Communist Party has, they've been able to get away with it longer than other countries. But you had Western democracies imposing almost the same sort of policies. It was pretty rich to see Justin Trudeau talk about the right of Chinese people to protest while he was being pretty brutal in his crackdown methods on the people of Canada when the trucker protest was going on.
Point well taken. Last question, Congressman. About a minute left. Congressman Hakeem Jeffries will be the new leader of the House Democrats, taking over from Nancy Pelosi. Your thoughts on this change?
Well, I'm really excited to see Nancy Pelosi leave a leadership position. I'd like to see her leave the House. That's up to the people of her district, but I am glad the Democrats are moving on to a new generation of leadership. I hope they're more collaborative and helpful than Pelosi and the team that's been there. But I'm glad they're going to be in the minority. So we have to get our own act together as Republicans, and we have to hit the ground running on January 3rd and frankly do what we said we would do. And I look forward to having the chance to serve in the majority again.
Well, there are many of us who are grateful that there will be some a counterbalance in Congress to the Biden administration for the next couple of years. It will be interesting to see how this new leadership in the House, if it is in fact any different than the old leadership. Congressman Davidson, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you.